Hello, now we're going to talk about funding agencies and their requirements. Now, there are various kinds of funding agencies. Perhaps the primary one comes from national government, which funds science. Now, if we were in the United States, that would be the National Science Foundation, which is the principal source of funding for example, earthquake studies, indeed for much of science. And therefore, it is very common, if you're an academic in the US, to apply for funds from NSF sources, from the various NSF programs which are based in Washington, D.C. The equivalents are the CSIRO in Australia, CNRS in France, the National Research Council, CNR in Italy, and so on and so forth. And Latin American countries also use this model. They will have some kind of national council for scientific investigation. Even Cyprus has a national body for funding science, even though it hasn't actually got very much money to disperse. The situation, though, is slightly different in Britain. Here, instead, we have a series of research councils which fund different areas of science. So we would primarily, from this list, be interested in the Natural Environment Research Council, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, and the Economic and Social Research Council. There is, of course, a problem here in funding research that somehow falls between the cracks. In other words, that is interdisciplinary enough that it involves the terrains of more than one research council. So the research councils have founded a body called Research Councils UK, which does deal with purely interdisciplinary research. And therefore, there are also calls for funding and programs that the research councils manage collectively rather than individually. A word or two about the research councils. They give grants to individuals, usually in universities or research institutes, and to groups of researchers, although primarily it tends to be the latter because very much research is done by teams rather than by single individuals. They also provide money to maintain laboratories and scientific equipment, such as radio telescopes and so on. They are sensitive, naturally enough, to national needs and priorities, as well they might be, because, of course, they get their money from the government and from taxation. So through their policies and their calls for proposals, they do reflect what are the principal concerns of the country. They respond also to calls for international collaboration, and in so doing, they represent a point of contact between funding bodies in other countries and funding bodies in the UK. So the UK Research Councils are one port of call, one point of reference for obtaining money with which to do research. A second possibility are the pan-national bodies, of which the principal one is the European Commission, which on behalf of the European Union provides opportunities for collaborative research in at least 3 European countries. So the European Commission encourages scientists and academics and their collaborators to form consortia where they can share out the tasks and pool their expertise. And what then happens is that the calls for research and the research that is done answer the needs of European citizens. So in fact, the European Commission will not fund purely national research, but it will fund research of European importance, providing that at least 3 member states of the European area are involved in the proposal. And there are the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, which are designed to provide opportunities, particularly for young academics, postdoctoral positions, for example, for 1 or 2 years, where the Marie Curie beneficiary will move to a different institution in Europe and have the opportunity to do funded research, or research at least with basic funding in terms of salary and some support. We also have some other pan-national bodies. For example, research is conducted by a foundation, the Global Earthquake Model, which is funded by the World Bank and several other sources, and is based in Pavia in northern Italy at the University of Pavia. And its purpose is perhaps self-explanatory. It exists to provide a global model of earthquakes for planning and prediction purposes. And it does so in a variety of different ways, from seismology through earthquake engineering to the human aspects of earthquake disasters. In Beijing, we have the World Bank's Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and another IRDR. As it happens that our IRDR at UCL got the name first, but they took our mnemonic, and IRDR in this case is the Integrated Research for Disaster Reduction, which is also based in Beijing and is funded by the World Bank and by Chinese money. For research at the doctoral level, we have organizations like the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission and the English-Speaking Union. The CSC, for example, funds postgraduate positions, for example, for citizens from India and Bangladesh or other Commonwealth countries, so that they can come to somewhere like the UK and study for their doctorates. We also have foundations of a charitable nature. It's worth remembering that UCL is physically next door to the Wellcome Foundation that separates the campus from Euston Square, Euston Road, Euston Station. And Wellcome is just one of a number of foundations that will fund research, often at the postdoctoral level, or they will fund specific projects when they receive proposals. So they will have calls for proposals or open seasons when, with a deadline, you can submit proposals to fund yourself or to fund your research. They specialize in educational exchange. For example, Fulbright in particular specializes in funding people to spend time in foreign countries. It's an American foundation, and it will fund periods of study in the US or for US scholars in other countries. So we do have support for scholars at various points in their career, particularly early career support, because of course it is difficult to get established as scholars. But the foundations all have different policies, different orientations, different priorities and goals. Next, there are seed grants from local institutions. For example, I personally have had a Santander grant to work with UNAM, the National University of Mexico, and that was helpful for providing money for travel and subsistence during my time in Mexico City and out in rural Mexico on assignment. So the Santander Bank funds connections between universities such as UCL and Latin American counterparts. There are various other programs within UCL, and most large universities will have programs where you can fund knowledge exchange or research or travel abroad and so on. So there tend to be funding cycles where calls for proposals are emitted, and then one waits for the proposals to come in, and there is a deadline, and finally proposals are evaluated. Now, these may be, in the simpler cases, one-cycle calls, and in the more complex cases, two-cycle calls. So what happens in the one-cycle call is that the call is emitted, the proposals are received, and they are evaluated, and then a decision is made. Simple and linear. In the two-cycle call, there is a process of weeding out the less strong proposals by asking institutions or researchers to submit draft proposals, summary proposals, which are not very long. They may be several pages long, but no more. And then the evaluating committee of the grant awarding body will look over these and compile a short list. Those who are not on the short list are not able to proceed, but those who are on the short list are informed that they can then proceed to provide a full proposal that will be competitively evaluated, and the winners will get the grant. So you receive a research proposal, and how is it evaluated? In the first place, does it answer the call? Not all proposals do that successfully and well, so an initial criterion will be, is this proposal spot on? Does it do what we asked for in the call for proposals? Is it on message or is it offbeat? Second criterion, is it feasible? Can it be done, and particularly can it be done with the resources of time and support which the proposer requests in the proposal? If it would take too long, if it's over-ambitious, if it doesn't have the right skills or equipment, then it is likely to be turned down. Innovation. Is the proposal sufficiently innovative that it is worth investing money in it? Will it push forward the frontiers of science, or will it provide something that is useful to humanity that didn't exist before and that therefore is a new development? Is it value for money? Will the money spent on it be spent wisely? Will it be an investment in science? Is this project likely to be done with the best available use of funding? And finally, is the project better than its competitors? If we evaluate each of the proposals in the pile in a comparative way, competitively, then which one comes out top? Or what is the rank order of these proposals if we can afford to fund more than one? Is the proposal well thought out? Is it well conceived? Are the timelines sensible? Will the work be done in the available time? Is the expenditure appropriate? Is this the right sort of money to spend? Incidentally, if you have a call for proposals that says, for example, that you can apply for £100,000, it generally is in your interest to apply for that, and you gain no brownie points. It really isn't advantageous to ask for less money. You don't undercut your competitors. If a certain amount is available, then the right thing to do is apply for the lot and not to apply for less, simply because otherwise there's a chance that the money will be wasted and you could do more with the money if you were awarded the grant. So there is no virtue in trying to undercut your competitors. Do the resources match the work plan? Have the proposers asked for the right resources? And are they right in terms of doing the work that is proposed? Are there good pathways to impact? In other words, is this proposal going to have utility? Is it going to be valuable to both academia and also to anyone outside it who benefits from research, for example, decision makers? And if there is a consortium involved, how strong is it? How diverse is it? European consortia don't need to include members from all four corners of Europe. They don't need to be a microcosm of European unity. What they do need to be is a consortium that will solve the problem which it has put to itself in the proposed project. So in fact, we evaluate the strength and the appropriateness of a consortium on the basis of, is it well made with respect to the problems that it has to solve? And in European research, you have to have, once again, at least 3 countries. So faced with a number of proposals, a stack of them on the table, and the number will vary considerably. The most popular programs might have more than 100 submitted, the least popular, only a handful. But there will be a competitive evaluation, as it is almost certain that fewer proposals can be funded than those that are submitted. So in the sense of trying to find the best proposal, there is an element of subjectivity in this. What does best mean in this case? How do you evaluate a series of proposals that are actually rather different from each other in terms of methodology or goals and objectives or whatever? So there are various questions that come into this that help the evaluators to make a decision. For example, is this a proposal that comes from a highly respectable institution and from people who have a strong track record in their field? Now, this is a little bit unfortunate because it means that if you've got money, you can get money. If you're well known and you have a strong track record for doing funded research, then you're more likely to get it than if you are a newcomer. Although, of course, even the people who are past masters of the art had to start somewhere and at some time. So it may be difficult to break into the cycle of funding, but once you're in there, it becomes progressively easier to stay in it because you will have the reputation, providing your research is good and appropriate. So, Research Councils UK will fund interdisciplinary research, which is a good idea, a good thing, because very much of what we do in the disasters field involves more than one discipline, and it can often involve things like trying to ascertain the social and human consequences of engineering. And therefore, it is very easy for the work that we do in this field to straddle the different research councils, to straddle the different disciplines in a way that would make monodisciplinary research funding inappropriate. So, overall, in summary, the situation is thus: priorities are changing, research is evolving, society's needs are evolving, the economy is changing, and this is putting pressure on researchers to change their view of the world and the way that they operate and what they propose to have funded. Science, however, is growing faster than funding, which means that more and more people are chasing less and less money in proportionate terms. There are cases where austerity means that funding is not growing, but it is contracting. Science may be under fire in certain places. For example, there are political connotations of much science, and in fact they may do no good to those who are attempting to fund worthwhile, valid and valuable research. Competitiveness is naturally intensifying where we have more scientists chasing less money. And so we are moving away from a situation where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could simply have an idea and submit a proposal. It is now much more common to have deadlines and to have consortia and to have calls for proposal that will specify quite precisely what the funding body wants the research done on. And this is the challenge that we have to face in getting our proposals funded.